All right, let's jump right in. We're going on a bit of a detective mission today, looking for hidden clues inside an ancient letter. And what's wild is that the very things that look like mistakes, well, they might just be the best proof we have that it's the real deal. So, what's on the examining table? It's the letter to the Philippians from the New Testament. The story goes that it was written by the Apostle Paul while he was a prisoner in Rome, sent to his friends back in Philippi. I mean, a prisoner's letter, a generous gift, a friend who gets deathly ill. It's got all the makings of a great story. But here's the big question. Is it a true story, or is it just a really clever fake? To figure that out, we have to dig deeper for a very specific kind of evidence.
Okay, so let's lay out our first piece of evidence. Exhibit A, if you will. This letter, supposedly sent from a prison cell in Rome.
And our investigation starts somewhere really strange. It's not with some big, obvious smoking gun. Actually, it starts with something that's, well, it's kind of confusing. It's a bit of a mess, honestly. The kind of thing that makes you scratch your head and think, wait, what? But stick with me, because that very messiness, it might just turn out to be the most powerful clue we have. So, let's get into clue number 1, a story that's all jumbled up. Check this out. Early in the letter, Paul makes this offhand comment. He thanks them for being joint contributors to the gift which I have received. That's it. No details, no context. If you were just reading this for the first time, you'd be totally lost, right? You'd have no idea what gift he's talking about. And that's kind of the point. Okay, then fast forward a whole chapter. He starts talking about this guy, Epaphroditus, who he's sending back to them. He calls him your messenger and says he ministered to my wants and supplied their lack of service. See how indirect that is? You get this feeling that Epaphroditus was helping him out somehow on their behalf, but it's still super vague. The picture is still fuzzy. And then, finally, way at the end of the letter, he drops the last piece of the puzzle. He says, I am full, having received from Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you. And boom, it all clicks into place. The vague hints, the messenger, it all makes sense now. Epaphroditus was the guy who delivered their financial gift. Okay, now let's just stop for a second and put on our forager hat. If you were making this whole thing up, what's your number one goal? It's to be believable, right? You absolutely can't afford to confuse your reader. So you'd tell the story logically. You'd say, the Philippians sent a gift. Epaphroditus delivered it. You'd put it all in one neat little package. You wouldn't scatter breadcrumbs across 4 chapters and just hope someone connects the dots. That's just bad forging. So it begs the question, why on earth would you write it this way? A forger would never risk being so confusing. But think about a real letter. A letter between friends who already share all the context. You don't need to spell everything out, do you? You just make casual references because you both already know the whole story. This messiness, it doesn't feel like a careful forgery. It feels like a real conversation caught on paper. All right, let's move on to clue number 2. This is where things get really interesting, the interlocking timelines. This is like finding puzzle pieces from 2 different boxes that just happen to fit together perfectly. For instance, in Philippians, Paul casually mentions that they sent him a gift right after he left Macedonia. Okay, file that away. Then you pick up a completely different letter to Corinthians, and in it he mentions that when he was in Corinth, which is exactly where he went right after leaving Macedonia, it was folks from Macedonia who supported him. You see that? The timelines click together perfectly. Or how about this? Philippians implies he's been in prison for a long time. Long enough for word to get to Philippi that Epaphroditus was sick, and for their worry to get all the way back to Paul in Rome. And what do we read in the book of Acts? That Paul's imprisonment in Rome lasted for 2 whole years. The details just align. And what's so powerful about this is how subtle it is. Look, if a forger wanted to create consistency, they'd copy the big, obvious facts. But to weave together these little offhand comments from totally separate documents, to make them interlock so perfectly without making a single mistake, that is unbelievably difficult. These connections don't feel like they were planted there. They feel like they were discovered. Okay, time for our third and final category of clues. And this one is all about the human element. Let's talk about Epaphroditus again, the guy who got sick. Paul doesn't just say, oh, Epaphroditus was ill. No, you can feel his anxiety coming off the page. He says if his friend had died, it would have been sorrow upon sorrow for him. And you can also feel his incredible relief when the guy pulls through. This isn't just a report of events, it's raw, personal, human emotion.
And here's something really fascinating. How does Epaphroditus get better? Paul just says God had mercy on him. There's no dramatic, miraculous healing. Now think about that for a second. If your goal was to forge a letter to make the apostles look amazing, wouldn't this be the absolute perfect place to insert a huge miracle? Paul laid hands on him and he was instantly healed. But we don't get that. We get this very normal story of a guy getting sick and then thankfully getting better. That lack of a flashy miracle, ironically, makes it feel so much more real.
And this next one, this might be the most powerful clue of all. At one point, Paul writes this really personal line to the Philippians. He encourages them by reminding them of the same conflict which he saw in me. Now, on the surface, that just sounds like, you saw me go through tough times. It sounds kind of general, but it's not. Because here's the kicker. If you go to the book of Acts, it tells the story of the very first time Paul ever visited their city, Philippi. And what happened? He was publicly dragged into the marketplace, beaten with rods, and thrown into prison. They didn't just hear about his suffering, they saw it happen with their own eyes in their own city. So that little phrase, the conflict which she saw in me, isn't vague at all. It's a direct callback to a shared traumatic memory. It's an inside reference that only makes sense if you were actually there.
So, let's step back and look at the whole case file. Let's put all the evidence on the table.
So what have we got? First, a story about a gift told in this scattered, disorganized way that a forger would never use, but is totally natural for a real letter. Second, we have these tiny details about timelines that perfectly and subtly interlock with other historical documents. And third, we have these deeply human moments, the genuine anxiety over a sick friend who recovers without a flashy miracle, and that powerful shared memory of a public beating. Each clue on its own is interesting, but together, they paint a really compelling picture. So, it all comes down to this one question. What's the more likely scenario here? Is it more likely that some brilliant master forger, a literary genius, painstakingly created this whole web of subtle, interlocking, emotionally authentic details and did it so flawlessly that no one's ever found a mistake? Or is the truth a lot simpler? Is it more likely that this is just a real letter, written by a real person to his friends, reflecting the messy, genuine, and complicated details of a true story? You have to decide which one takes a bigger leap of faith.